the people of sake actually brought me into sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Welcome to one more episode of Sake on Air, broadcast here from the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association at the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center here in Tokyo. My name is Justin Potts, and today we have a full house. Together with me on my right is
Christopher Pellegrini,
our man in charge of any and all things Shochu. To my immediate left, I have
John Gauntner.
Welcome, John. We haven't had you in the seat for a little while.
Sorry to have been absent. Pleasure to be here.
Very good, very good. And on the end of the table, we have
Another Christopher.
Christopher
Hughes.
We like to keep things simple around here.
Yeah.
Right? So today, we are going to be digging into the topic of Junmai sake and what is referred to as Aruten sake, or sake that has had brewer's alcohol added to it. We are going to dig into exactly what that means, where that came from, and why do people even care about this conversation? We're going to kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of that in this show. Aruten versus Junmai. And sorry, using the word versus actually sort of starts us off in a poor context.
Yeah.
Aruten and Junmai.
Yes.
And the ways in which they coexist beautifully in the world of sake.
We should emphasize early on, though, that Aruten is short for Arukoru Tenka, which means added alcohol, which just means not Junmai. And furthermore, Aruten's easier to say, and it's easier to classify sake that's made in that way, but it's not an official term. It's not a legal term. It's a nickname. So when we throw it out, what Aruten really means is just sake that's not of the Junmai variety, not made in the Junmai methods.
Yeah.
Right. It's brewer's alcohol that has been added to sake.
Right. Because some sake has this distilled alcohol added to it to kind of, bring out more of the aroma and the flavor. And kind of lower the flavors. It kind of lowers the body a little bit because of the way that the aroma compounds they stick better to the alcohol molecules than they do the water. So you've got this you've got like two categories really, haven't you? If you like, you've got like a Junmai category, and then you've got this Aruten category.
Trying to avoid the whole...
Yeah, I was trying to avoid that. But I think it's important to say that there are kind of like two categories.
There are.
Yeah.
So, you've got basically, as Chris pointed out, two varieties or two divisions that aren't necessarily at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. But one is the Junmai style, which is made with rice, water, and koji mold only. Yeah. And the other being the non-Junmai style, which we're calling the Aruten style, which is made with rice, water, koji mold, and a little bit of distilled alcohol.
But for people who even have a familiarity with this stuff, it's still hard to wrap my head around. It really is. I'm yet to see a really clear, easy to understand depiction where you can look at it, you can show people this chart, and they go, okay, I get it.
Really? I really like my pyramid. I think that's...
Your pyramid is fantastic.
Your pyramid's
at one glance, you get it all. You got to stare at it for 20 minutes, but you get
it. Right? But that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
I found, I think it was a...
But it's there. It's all there.
Yeah.
Somebody explain it to you. I don't know. Maybe I'm too close to the topic, but I guess I just don't see it being that complicated.
I don't just communicate to people who aren't necessarily sake isn't their goal or their end goal. That's not why they're there. They're there just to have a general interest in food, or they have general interest in things, or they're on a tour. It's like, oh, sure, I'm in town. I'll visit a sake brewery. And when you take people on tours and you say this, these conversations come up. Oh, this is the time when we do this. This is the place where we do this. This is our kind of sake. And this vocabulary just comes up and it needs context.
Yeah, sure.
And so in doing that, for people who just really have no context for what this is or where this is coming from, to put it in a very simple display is really challenging. Probably the best one that I've seen is Tim Sullivan of Urban Sake.
Yeah.
He has a really nice chart, which is very visual, which I felt like communicates it really well. I'll put links into your and then show notes. We'll put into yours and Tim's.
The biggest problem here, when you start talking about Junmai and Aruten, is that on the bottle there are still very few brewers actually writing the word Junmai in English. So even if you talk about Junmai and you explain Junmai, and then you say, okay, so how do you tell alcohol-added sake and Junmai sake apart? Well, simple. The one that hasn't had any alcohol added into it has this word Junmai. So if you can see the word Junmai, then you know it's not had any alcohol added. If you can't see this word Junmai, okay, fine, that's fine. But then on the bottle, you've got to look for the Chinese characters. Yeah. I don't know. I think it would be really nice if we had like a special sticker or something that says one's alcohol added and one's not.
Hold your breath.
Yeah, I know.
The other side is tough love. I mean, if you look at German wine, there's like 12
yes, the Trocken, Qualitats wine.
I'm sure many people over the years have said to the Germans, "You guys make this easy." And they're like, 9.
No.
I'm sure that'll get edited out. This is what we're doing. So to a certain degree, we got to have tough love with sake. You guys, it's not that. There's 10 words.
It's not that hard.
You'll have it in 3 days. I promise you.
These aren't Indian yoga position names or anything that are like 16 syllables long.
Or like long German nouns.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, if you learn the Chinese character for rice, and it's not a difficult character to learn. It's probably one of the easiest. It's one of the first Chinese. I mean, it's true. Yeah, it's an asterisk. And so if you learn that, then, and that doesn't really appear on the front of the bottle anywhere else apart from where they're describing what the rice is and whatever. But it appears in big letters normally on the big character set on the front of the label. So if you know that Chinese character.
Yeah, it's still a huge ask. It really is a big ask of people.
Yeah.
To remembering words is one thing. To ask them to visualize that stuff, that's part of what I think makes those characters fun. Is you kind of got that visualization part, and so actually integrating that into your education, it's enjoyable. But it is
most
a challenge.
People don't want to go that far.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
And at least German is written in Western.
Yep.
So
So it's the reality is it's not that tricky, but it's not. We're not making anybody's lives easier by adding, by having that factor in there.
Can we take a quick look at the history of it?
Yes, let's do that.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Historically, sake is made from rice, water, and koji, which is steamed rice that has koji mold grown upon it. And that's it. However, hundreds of years ago, to protect the sake, sometimes brewers would add distilled beverage, shochu, which Chris can tell you more about, and that would raise the alcohol content and protect the sake against bacteria and other things that might drop into it. However, in the late 1800s, when they came into the Meiji era, new tax rules were written which forbade that. So from the late 1800s until about World War II, all sake was of the Junmai variety. In other words, only rice water and koji was allowed in it, and no added alcohols in any sake at all. Then came World War II in a very dire set of circumstances, and rice was obviously
in short
supply. And so the government did something that was very intelligent and very responsible for the particular situation at the time, and they had brewers cut all of their product with some distilled alcohol so they could come up with sake that used a lot less rice. And once the war ended and things returned to normal, the brewers were no longer forced to do that. But every brewer in the industry was like, whoa, this is a lot less expensive to make it this way, isn't it? And the average person on the street was content with enjoying sake the way it was. So all sake pretty much was added alcohol until the 1960s. We can come back to that, but that's the history behind added alcohol sake. That's the history behind non-Junmai sake.
Yeah, essentially, these were solutions that came about as a result of some sort of a problem that they had to address, some sort of logistical issue, whether it was, in the mid 1600s when it was in the Edo period and there was, losing a batch of sake, losing rice. That was a huge, huge, huge loss. So anything that could be done to prevent that was a good thing. Back then, the shochu that they were making was made from rice or from sakekasu. They didn't have all these different potatoes, all these wild varieties and stuff like that.
We probably should add in there that actually the whole protecting the sake thing, first of all, you don't add sulfites in sake, so the sake is unstable. You remove the yeast when you make wine, but the thing is, even if you remove the yeast when you make sake, you still have the koji enzymes left over, so it will still continue to ferment, or the flavor will change. And going all the way back to when they were adding shochu to protect the sake, well, the first reason I can think of is that they probably weren't pasteurizing yet, or not on a large scale, and also lack of refrigeration. Right? They were pasteurizing because I know they had it before Louis Pasteur announced and everything. But
Louis came along.
Yeah. But but they didn't have refrigeration, right? And so, this was a necessary evil, to add this shochu in there.
And back then, they understood how to make sake, but they don't understand the whys for all things. What is the scientific understanding behind all the things?
If you do it this way, the evil humors won't affect
Exactly. And so what they talk about is something called a hyochikin or a hyochi bacteria, which is essentially lactic acid, a type of lactic acid,
the evil
bacteria that exists and sort of thrives at about 30 degrees, give or take, somewhere in there.
It survives everything basically.
It does, right? And it survives alcohol.
Yeah,
And when a long time ago, when they weren't able to brew to not as high alcohol content, when they didn't have refrigeration, when they didn't have all that understanding of everything, the potential for that bacteria to come alive,
wreak havoc.
Wreak havoc, and that's what it did. Is that it doesn't appear in one tank; it does wreak havoc. It's a wildfire, essentially. And so you don't lose a tank; you essentially lose the brewery.
No, I'm trying to think about a term. What's it called? The Hatsunomikiri.
Oh yes.
So Hatsunomikiri is a tasting in the middle of the summer, where a brewer will have a tasting of his sake, of the brewery's sake, and usually it was for the government. And the government will come in and taste one glass a little bit from every single tank. And the whole point of this Hatsunomikiri was to make sure that sake hadn't gone south, that it had been properly pasteurized and was stable. And that was an indication of how fragile sake was as recently as the early 20th century.
Yeah. The Hatsunomikiri, it's still kind of it's a tradition. It's still a practice. A lot of times, cool. It's really cool. Breweries will do it amongst themselves. Sometimes they'll invite people to do that, and then they will also have the professors from the tax office and whatever come, and they'll have it big, maybe together with a number of different breweries and do that and do a big tasting, and it's still kind of part of the tradition. And it's right. So it essentially everything was Junmai until they figured out we can save ourselves, we can protect ourselves a bit by adding a bit of shochu here in the early Edo period. That disappears. You end up in war times, and when you're trying to sustain an entire nation, rice is your staple, right? Exactly, and it goes into everything. So anything you can do to preserve that is of utmost importance.
And we should separate the two. Like the what they were doing, with the shochu, adding shochu, the purpose is different, and it's kind of important to understand that, I think. So. What they were doing in the wartime was really kind of trying to top up the volume, and they weren't just adding just alcohol; they were adding sweeteners and whatever to get their hands on. I think, right?
I think that when they started doing it in 1942, they had the brewers do it to save rice,
right?
Initially. And then the brewers were not forced to stop doing that after the war ended and things returned to normal. But as they did it, they're like, whoa, check this out. We can actually pull out a bit more aroma, can't we? We do a little bit of flavor. We don't have to put that much in, do we? Just back it off a little bit, and we can get more flavors and aromas. For example, before the whole current system of Junmai Shu, Ginjo Shu, Daiginjo existed, they just had Nikyu, Ikkyu, and Tokkyu. In other words, second class, first class, and special class. And that time, the ranking system was done by the government. In other words, you submitted your sake, and if they thought it was good enough, they would give you a first class or special class ranking, and then they would charge more tax on that sake. Second class was default. But what was good about this is the consumer could trust it. The government tasted it, put a ranking on it. You pay a little bit more money, but you can be assured that it was going to be a higher class. So I think what happened is, as they experimented with added alcohol sake, they realized, hey, if we just don't put so much in and put a little bit in, we actually end up with a more aromatic and flavorful sake, don't we? And I think going through that process is when brewers started to learn that, okay, we could add a ton of it and increase yields by a lot, or we could add a little bit and use that as like a technical crowbar to crank out more flavor and aroma out of the fermenting mash. I think that's how things developed.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I understand it. I heard another really interesting story about the origin of alcohol addition, and it's just one theory, okay? And I heard this from a brewer. And I learned that there was a professor in Tokyo or something who started adding alcohol to find a solution for some troops in Manchuria. They're basically their alcohol was freezing over, and of course, if you increase the alcohol level in an alcoholic beverage, generally it will freeze around the equivalent negative number of the actual percentage of alcohol. So by adding alcohol, increasing the alcohol volume, you then stop it from freezing over. But I just really straight away want to point out that the reason for adding alcohol in sake is not to increase the alcoholic volume.
Right, and that's a very important question that probably a lot of people have is, so, I mean, okay, you add this distilled alcohol to the sake, what happens to the final alcohol percentage of the drink?
It's diluted down again with water to about 16%. Yeah. So the important thing to remember is that added alcohol sake, aruten sake, non-junmai sake, is not fortified. For a short period of time during the brewing process, the alcohol is a little bit higher because you've added it. But they add more water, and adding that water was a part of the recipe from the beginning, but they add more water at the end to bring the alcohol down to about 16%. So it's not fortified even though they've added alcohol.
It's exactly the same alcohol percentage as any Junmai-shu. Or it's in the same range anyway.
Well, you have genshu and things like that, but your standard, yes. Sure. Yeah.
So what is this brewer's alcohol? A long time ago in Edo period, it was shochu. So what is it now? Where does it come from? How does it made? Essentially, it's made from...
Made from anything, really.
It's made from a lot of different things. I think a lot of it is basically like a molasses, from molasses essentially. It's sugar cane that has been turned to sugar. You basically get the... Is that...
it is imported.
Well, they make sugar cane... The alcohol, my understanding is that most of it is that the alcohol is distilled from sugarcane overseas.
Yes.
Then imported into Japan where they redistill it. Okay. But I think that they import it very roughly distilled.
Right.
And then they redistill it to get it 90 or higher.
Okay.
But then they water it down, shipping it from the domestic distiller to the actual breweries.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so most of it is made from these...
Short answer, most of it is made, I think, most of it is made from alcohol that's been distilled from sugarcane.
Yes.
And then redistilled once it gets in the country.
Yes. There are some, I hear there's some from rice, some from corn, some from potato. There are some other exceptions. Primarily it's...
They want it to be neutral, right? They don't want it to have any flavor
Any
of
character
its own.
whatsoever.
Yeah, because the point is not adding flavor.
If you distill it far enough, that's not a problem.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
You can make it from anything.
That's it. So I think they tend to distill it up to about 95%. Sure. And then when they actually use it, when they actually add it into the moromi, into the mash, they've already diluted it down to about, 40, I want to say 30% or so. And so it's already been diluted back down. And then, again, in the process, you're going to dilute the sake again as well, too, most likely.
And there are rules about how much alcohol they're allowed to add. So it's not just like you add as much as you like or as little as you like. There are actual rules for the grades in the special designation system. So, for example, futsu-shu. So that's the kind of... We refer to it legally as non-premium sake, but there's a lot of good futsu-shu out there. So whether that's the case or not, maybe that's a subject for another discussion on the podcast. But futsu-shu can have up to 50% alcohol added. That's the 50% the weight of the rice, right?
Then so the polished rice.
The polished rice. And then, all the other ones, all the other in the premium, super premium, category, Junmai ginjo, daiginjo, it's up to 10%. I'm not allowed to add any more than that. And the alcohol must be added at the end of the fermentation. That means that they can't add it once they've filtered the sake. You can't add anything other than water once you've filtered the sake. And that's the same for futsu-shu. That's the rule throughout for all types of sake.
So when we're looking at this aruten sake, or this that has the brewer's alcohol, we're kind of we'll maybe get into this a little bit more when we kind of look at the pros and cons, and sort of how these things are examined and why people are talking about this stuff. Is that generally it can get split up in two categories: futsu-shu, and then you're talking about premium sake.
So you're talking about added alcohol sake, right?
Yes.
Non-junmai?
Yes. Non-junmai.
So if you were to take all sake divided into two, which we said we don't really want to do, but we know, which is Junmai and non-Junmai, or Aruten. Then you look at Aruten, you can further divide that into two, which is regular sake and then special designation sake. Some would say premium and non-premium, which isn't completely wrong, but not completely correct either. But you could do that as well. So for the futsu-shu, the regular stuff, you're allowed to add a lot more, and that's done for economic reasons.
Right. And so, it's done for economic reasons, but there are also places that set out to make a really, really, really delicious futsu-shu.
There's a lot of great futsu-shu out there.
So that's kind of where that area gets tricky, is because futsu-shu kind of gets a bad rap.
It does.
It really does. But it's really, without really having tasted the sake, without trying out, finding what you like, it's really tough to, just looking at a bottle, to figure out what kind of futsu-shu is. Is this a futsu-shu that is just been crafted to get cut costs and really get stuff on the market, or is this some place that is really set out to make a really, really high end?
I would call it a modern futsu-shu because, like, 10, 12 years ago when I was working in London, I mean, I never came across a good futsu-shu. I mean, that could just be what they were importing, but my understanding as well, brewers were the way brewers were advertising it was that there weren't good futsu-shu out there. So I think it's a recent development that we've become able to. We started to make good futsu-shu.
I guess I might question that. I mean, certainly a lot of what is out in the market is really cheap and harsh. But I think a lot of small brewers are making decent futsu-shu.
I'm sure they were. I'm not saying it's like wasn't existent.
Okay, if you look at volume,
yeah.
But I think
it's become more of a. We have this like modern futsu-shu, right? Breweries going out of their way to make a good futsu-shu and sell it over there, Junmai ginjo or Junmai daiginjo, whatever. But it's important to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, that futsu-shu doesn't have to have alcohol added to it. There are non-alcohol added styles of futsu-shu as well.
Yes. You're right. There is that exception. So, like, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example. What's that really sweet sake by Ichinokura?
I don't know the product name.
I kind of have a feel.
The pink label with the green bottle, pink label, flowers.
Himeze.
It's
Yes. Yeah, Himeze. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a real low alcohol sake, though.
Right.
It's like 8 to 10%.
Yeah,
exactly right. But it doesn't fall into. I don't think it's not.
It's not.
Sorry,
Right.
that's not.
It doesn't qualify.
It doesn't qualify. It's actually a Junmai, but it doesn't qualify as Junmai. So you won't see
use-
Junmai on there.
They use the outside standard rice to make it, I think. So they can't. They don't.
Not inspected rice. you mean?
Non-inspected rice falls outside the inspected rice category, so they can't call it.
Or it has something to do with the amount of koji rice that they use,
Could be.
maybe, or something like
Yeah.
that. I think was the other one. So there's so there are exceptions where it's. I look for the Junmai. It's no Junmai. I better stay away. But actually, they are.
Right.
As well as, and so you're also starting to see producers that are trying to distance themselves from preconceptions, whether it's a futsu-shu or a Junmai ginjo or a Junmai or whatever, or a yeast or whatever, right, from a certain thing. And so what they're doing is they're maybe making a very quote unquote high end or premium sake, but maybe they're avoiding using a lot of the languages associated with that they could use, but they don't, in order to. So it's like, I know you like. Yes, it's a ginjo, but we don't. That's not who we're going for. That's not what we're trying to sell. It's it's a futsu-shu, but it's not our selling point. This is something pretty pretty unique, and so you see these really beautiful, lovely bottles with very, very little information on them, which is very intentional. So that becomes
well, they kind of, a lot of brewers say they think it makes it easier for the consumer to kind of get into their sake, and that might be true. But I also wonder if everyone started doing it, it wouldn't be a problem. But having some brewers doing it, some brewers not doing it, gets a little bit confusing, I think, for the consumer.
If so many people are talking about what grades are, people are going to ask.
Yeah.
It's not on the label. It's like, what's a grade?
Right.
We're not telling you. Well, okay, thanks. I'll take something.
There's too much risk there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Need consistency at least. And with futsu-shu as well, can I quickly add as well, the futsu-shu, you can add other things in as well, like acidifiers and, flavor things, So I think originally, like we were saying about futsu-shu, the reason it got such a bad rap, still perhaps, is that a lot of futsu-shu are made. It's really just about making massive volume sake for the lowest price possible. That's consistent, that you can sell year in, year out.
Yeah, and that's so when we're talking about Aruten, or the sake that has brewer's alcohol added to it, about 80% of the sake in Japan is Aruten, and of that, about 60% or so is futsu-shu.
About 65% of the entire market is futsu-shu.
Is futsu-shu, right?
So,
and so then that other 15% is made up of ginjo or whatever. So it's a whole lot of it, and
most of the market
is most of the market. And so just kind of getting back to the war. So what you're talking about is you're able to add all that other stuff and whatever to it, and that became common on the market. Again, as John said earlier, they realized it does have some benefits, both in volume as well as when used sparingly for flavor and aroma and things like that. And then they could also make more money because they can make more for less. And so there was that benefit on the brewers end on that side. And so then because it stuck around on the market, right? Just because the war ended doesn't mean everything goes back to normal immediately. And so you have a couple of decades, you have several decades, you have several generations where this is all that's on the market. And so you also lose a couple of generations of people who haven't tried Junmai sake. It's just not available, right? You have this big gap, kind of similar to like koshu or something like that as well, where they instituted taxes and it pretty much disappeared. You don't just lose the product, you lose the market when it's gone from there for a while. And so you have this sort of long period of time where the brewers are then benefiting post-war. They're able to make money again and they can make stuff for cheaper. You have a market that isn't demanding Junmai because they're not expecting it, and they haven't for a while. And so it just kind of sticks around. Something that was intended as for very well-meaning purposes, is sort of a stopgap to really institute that those laws. Was it 1948? I think.
Which laws?
Not the laws, but the what's the word? Allowing them to make
42, I think.
42 is when they allowed them to make, and then in 48 is when they let them do the sanzoshu, right?
I don't know that.
Sanbai Jozoshu, right? This is the real evil, isn't it? I mean, from what I read, this was really foul stuff. You know, I mean, if this was anything goes, put whatever you want in there, and it was like really horrible, sweet, rich. A lot of people don't like drinking sweet sake or have this image of sweet sake being bad because they remember this Sanbai Jozoshu or they've read about this Sanbai Jozoshu, or it just created this bad image for sweet sake in the industry, I think. And but it's important to point out that, you know, what we call, you know, alcohol added sake these days is not bad. It's not a question of which one is better. You know, it's really more kind of about preference. You know, there are a lot of the characteristics are slightly different. Should we talk about the characteristics?
Yeah.
And the benefits, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So then the other benefits. So first, the brewer's alcohol. It was some sort of a solution, right? And then, as we're talking about, they discovered this actually, as John mentioned, you can bring out nice aromas. You can do some nice things to the flavor, right? You open up that, right? And it kind of opens up those esters and things like that. So they said, gosh, we can do this. And so now, about 90% of, for example, all the competition sake is like 90% of it or close to is straight daiginjo.
Easily. And it was 100 until a couple of years ago.
Right. Right. And so, you're starting to see a little bit of a change. But again, so they realize, this is something that that we can use, that we can...
And sometimes you get this really nice cutting finish as well, which, you know, I don't think it's a science exactly, but some brewers use the alcohol to actually kind of cut the sake off at the end, and you get this nice kind of feel in the throat, and it, you know, fades away nicely. There are actually a lot of benefits too.
Shelf life is another.
Yeah, shelf life is a massive.
Let's do it. Let's kind of run down a list here. Then. Yeah. Let's say I put together kind of a short list here of sort of the arguments for both
and against
for both. Right. Well, I didn't put any against. I put the for both.
Okay.
And as we kind of go down, we can kind of go through it. And if you guys come up with other ones, we can just kind of run down there and go. So as we're talking about, with the Aruten, with the brewer's alcohol, one is cost cutting.
Yeah.
Right. So that's going to be a big one. You're able to save money,
yeah.
which again isn't a bad thing. No. Most of the things that people eat today are the reason they can eat them is because somebody came up with some way to cut costs somewhere. You know, people have their different thoughts,
and even
personal
if you look
thoughts,
at a ginjo and a Junmai ginjo together from the same producer with the same rice and the same maibue, by using added alcohol, it'll be about 15% cheaper retail price. From my experience.
Yes. Yeah.
So even though they do it for technical reasons in the premium level, it does add to cost performance.
Definitely. Right. Definitely. Because you're not using as much of the rice, right? You don't have to use as much of the rice. Yep. That becomes a 4 against the Junmai later on, right? But we're just talking
we'll stick to Aruten for
right
now. So you get that cost cutting, which is a plus. And then what that also then results in is you're able to provide affordable and, if well-crafted, tasty sake to more people, right? You're able to produce more to reach that larger market, which is important to have. You know, that idea of accessibility. Sake is still generally cheap. Many people argue too cheap, and I think that's very much a fair argument for sure. But still, there's still a lot of people that would prefer a $6 bottle of sake versus a $12 bottle of sake. You know, and so having tasty sake for $6, that resonates with people. There's a lot of struggles there. There's a lot of problems with that. But, you know, you look at the wine market, there's a lot of $3 wine out there, you know, and there's a lot of people who want that. It's a different market, sort of. A
wine is
situation,
the same. But wine is the same. You know, you don't have great grapes. I mean, that's a negative thing. But you know, it costs to grow good grapes. It costs, you know, the grapes are costly, and so to make cheap, affordable wine, you just, you know, fill the gap. You add other things in there.
Right. $2 chuck.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And with sake, of course, you can use the alcohol as a flavor modifier. right? Because it's neutral. So you can actually, say for example, you have a sake which is quite sweet, quite rich. You can kind of dilute it down, if you like, using the alcohol, thin it out a little bit, which is a positive, isn't it? I think,
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I said, and then you've got sort of quality maintenance. Once you've got that, added alcohol in there, you have a more stable product, better shelf life, as you mentioned before.
Absolutely.
Right. That's a big challenge right now, especially with, distribution. In Japan, it's not really an issue anymore. We've got the most amazing, cool refrigeration transportation services you could imagine. And I can have delicious sake in 12 hours from just about anywhere. We're pretty lucky. But when you're looking, international markets, these different places, and just having stuff, if it's going to be out on the shelf for a long period of time, there's value there in having that. And then once you start getting into the higher end of that premium sake, then as we're getting back to flavors, aromatics, and being able to tweak those. Some might say enhance those. Again, but it's all personal preference as well too.
And it doesn't always work that way. Like just, we don't want people to think that every single alcohol added sake out there is going to follow, those kind of characteristics, because they don't. But there are a lot of, if you get a typical alcohol added sake, it tends to have more aroma. Or it's the way it jumps out at you. It kind of be more pronounced, I would say. It might not have more aroma, but it's more pronounced. Kind of lifts it out of the glass, if you like. But yeah, so what are the arguments for?
Well, before we move on to that, I think it's worthwhile to point out two things about Aruten sake. And one of those is some people might say that they can smell or taste the alcohol that's been added. And as long as it's at a reasonable level, that's actually not true. Because it's the exact same alcohol that is fermented by the yeast when sake is being brewed. Furthermore, the final alcohol content is pretty much the same. So you can't really smell or taste it there. Others might say that added alcohol gives them a hangover. And if that's true, it's only because you drank too much of it. Because again, it's the exact same alcohol that is naturally in the sake, produced by the yeast. So those two things are actually fallacies that we hear about a lot.
Yeah. Yep. And so I guess that's actually a very good one for then jumping into what are the arguments for Junmai, because that's one of them is the that at a brewer's alcohol, it doesn't sit with me well. I either feel worse the next day or it just doesn't sit with me the same that a Junmai sake was. It's hard to attest to people's individual experiences.
Yes, if you weren't there,
really, really difficult. But as
you don't have the
John
psychological kind of thing there, right? Because we kind of say it's a misconception, right? So but you don't have that psychological edge there. So if it really, really, really gets to you, the fact that it's had alcohol added to it, then yeah, with Junmai, there's none of that. So it does remove that, But
then the other thing that was sensitive. So I guess essentially people's sensitivity to Aruten or brewers alcohols. People report.
Sensitivity or physical sensitivity?
I think it's,
Well, that's the thing. So it's right. That's the question, right?
Which one is it?
It shouldn't be physical.
no, it's not.
It shouldn't be
So
physical,
there's that.
right?
So
it's
the other
psychological.
one. So the other one is some people say I get this question a lot more now is sake gluten free? So sensitivity to gluten.
Well, Aruten has no gluten.
Well, here's the thing.
Or the
There are
alcohol.
those that say that if the alcohol that was added was distilled from barley, that it could be not gluten-free.
Trace
However,
gluten.
if they distilled it all the way, right, there's no gluten in ethyl alcohol.
It
No,
cannot.
there isn't.
It cannot
However,
survive.
if someone's sensitive about this and they want to know where all the ingredients were and they want to know that there was no gluten that ever came anywhere near this,
Okay, then
the
that's
guy had a
that's
bread
something.
sandwich that's putting the cases into the truck.
Sure.
It's out.
Yeah.
Then we cannot 100% guarantee.
That's true. It's the same with like people with soba allergies, for example, in the shochu world. And they're like, I'm allergic to soba. Can I drink soba shochu? I'm like, yeah, it's distilled, but I can't guarantee that
Guarantee
in the
You don't wanna be the-
distillery,
yeah.
I don't know how
don't
far
wanna-
away those
no.
vats are. So I'm just going to say, okay, just
a big
steer away
risk.
from that.
Atone, gome, wrong language. Sometimes when they do, when they add sweeteners to futsu-shu, it doesn't have to be, what's the stuff they usually use? Mizuame and things like that. It could have been possibly, legally, the possibility exists that it was a non-gluten-free sweetener.
Yeah.
And so we can't 100% guarantee that futsu-shu is gluten-free.
Yep, exactly.
No, they have to list it on the bottle, right? They don't have to list on the bottle what they actually used.
No, they don't.
No, so.
No, they don't.
Right, but just the added alcohol, though, in and of itself, 99.9% of the time is going to be completely fine.
Right,
Yeah.
It should be 100%.
It should be 100%,
because
but we
most
can't
places
guarantee it.
aren't comfortable. It's like,
No.
don't worry about it. They, as a general rule, they will say,
Yeah.
There's so little gluten in there. The alcohol is going to be worse on your health than the gluten.
Oh, absolutely. And that's always when I hear people who say, okay, the Aruten stuff gives me a hangover. I'm like, okay, how much did you drink? Right. And they're like, oh, we went pretty hard. Well, okay, it's a volume of ethanol issue here that any other alcohol would have done your head in. And it just happened to be honjozo.
Yeah.
And that is not honjozo's fault. No. Now, I mean, you can argue until you're blue in the face and nobody's going to listen to you. But I mean, sorry, it's the same alcohol.
I get more of a hangover from Junmai. I'm just going to say that.
Right.
From experience, I get more of a hangover from Junmai.
And people do have different sensitivities.
Right.
I have friends who can drink vodka for days and can't handle sake for anything. Like
it's funny how that works.
There are individual differences, and so is it possible that some people could have a sensitivity? Some it could be flavor sensitivity. Could it just be?
Could it be an
something
age issue? I mean, I used to make craft beer. Craft beer does my head in. Now I'm really ashamed to say it. I can only have I can only have 30 now. And then, no. I can only have like about 3 or 4 before I'm getting close to the line where the next day I'm going to feel it. Yeah. It's weird how
I
that.
had one glass of red wine, I get a hangover.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
That's not fair at all. You're right.
I
That's
agree with this.
unjust.
I can't drink beer, really. And I don't let bitterness for one thing. But also, I'm not used to drinking. And also, wine, you're saying wine gets you, more hungover. I agree with that. I think for me, I'm actually better drinking spirits most of the time. It doesn't affect me. Yeah, because when I was in university, honestly, when I was in university, all I used to drink was like, we were doing shots of vodka or whatever. And I think my body became used to drinking spirit. They don't kind of go straight to your head, if you like, right? When you drink a fermented beverage, it gets consumed a lot quicker, I think. No?
For my body, it's not.
Like I said, so that's the thing. There's going to be individual differences.
For me,
at the end
I
of the
don't
day.
feel the effect of the alcohol till later with spirits. And my body kind of sobers up a lot quicker, if you like. So with fermented, it starts to affect me straight away. With sake, I'm still pretty, I have to drink quite a lot of it. But I really do feel it starts taking effect quite quickly. Wow. When I'm drinking shochu, I can go there for ages and not feel
wild.
Yeah.
No, I can't do that.
No?
Distilled beverages, I don't get along with them so well. So this is a great end time. We should probably move along.
We've gone off down
but it's important. So it's
important.
So one of the arguments again, so just
people
is that people have different sensitivities to it, right?
Yeah,
right. And there are reasons to respect that, and there are reasons that actually, it's kind of maybe not true, and you probably don't have to worry about it. But that's one reason. Another reason that a lot of people for justifying saying it should be Junmai is that's all you don't need it to make sake. Is some people's justification.
That's true.
We made sake for so long with nothing but rice koji, and water.
You can make it that way,
right?
Yeah.
And people who,
but you can make sake without milling it down beyond 80%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And so
you can make sake without selecting the yeast.
Yep. So that brings us. So that's another rabbit hole that maybe we won't go down today. But so the word Junmai literally means pure rice.
Pure rice.
So it brings with it sort of a connotation of purity or
Traditionalism,
naturalness or traditional things like that,
It was
right?
well named from a marketing viewpoint.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so a lot of people prefer something that to them that feels closer to quote unquote the real thing or the traditional thing.
Yeah.
Thing is, it's really hard to draw the line.
Yes,
It's
it is.
Junmai.
Yes, it is.
So it's once you start going down that hole is where. So what about is this Koji King? Is this one that has been around for thousands of years that has been perfectly preserved in the same state, or is it something that has been tampered with? Is this a new rice variety? Is this a hybrid? Is this organic rice? Is this, are these yeast? Is this Yamahai? Is this Kimoto? Is this an older style? When you start going down that road,
no one ever buys a bottle of wine and goes, I'm not drinking this. This isn't the traditional stuff, what is that? What is traditional wine? There's no such thing. So, this kind of traditionalism stuff, it does kind of grate me a little bit because, I think you're stripping away the layers of diversity that sake has quite rightly earned itself over all this time,
Yeah. I mean, there's a million ways to look at this, but if you look at sake, it's a very hands-on, it's a very what am I trying to say? A lot of manhandling takes place in the raw materials. If you talk about natural, there's absolutely nothing natural about sake production. It's all craftsmanship, right? I mean, if you want to make natural sake, steam some rice, let it sit there, come back in 3 weeks. You'll have something. But they started cultivating koji and doing it to very precise ratios for a reason. It makes the final product taste better.
You can't make alcohol naturally from rice anyway. Like, you can do it with wine because grapes will naturally ferment themselves. You leave them in a bowl or something with the right conditions. You can't do it with rice. Rice just will not ferment itself, right? You need to first turn that starch into sugar. So like you say, how can it possibly be?
Where do you draw the line between what's natural and what
Yep,
isn't?
exactly. And that's
doing it this way for about 1,000 years for a lot of damn good reasons. And because all that manhandling, making a yeast starter and then slowly adding the other additions 3 times over 4 days, all of that. How you press it, how long you ferment it, what yeast you use. It makes the stuff taste better in the opinion of most people that enjoy it.
Right.
I said, and sort of what's happening now, I think, is that not just with brewer's alcohol, but those, for lack of a better word, more traditional methods or whatever. Just like adding alcohol, it's something that came about in some sort of form of necessity, based on the situation and availability and things like that. So a lot of those skill sets or things that were developed out of some form of necessity. And so it wasn't so much we're going to make this style because it's the best. It's we're going to make this because this is what we can do right now, And so now you're starting. Now that we have the freedom and the resources to go back and explore, people are going, so how did they do that before? Before it wasn't like, back in 1600, what were they doing back in 1400? Maybe we should go and try that again. I don't think that was part of the conversation. They didn't have, right? But now we're in a very unique position where people can go back and go, so what was that like and how did that different? And so we're starting to see styles and that are, of course, not the exact same thing that it was 300 years ago or 400 years ago, but that are pulling hints and references to those traditional things. And so as people start to explore that, I think it generates a lot of interest for people and different flavor profiles and different things that, which I think it was a really great thing, right? You're just like adding brewer's alcohol. It's adding more diversity. It's adding more possibility. And I think it opens up the market more, and so people are starting to find different.
There are definite benefits for arguments for making Junmai though, or focusing on Junmai.
Absolutely. So sorry, I kind of diverged a little bit off Junmai.
It's okay, you gotta edit this, not us.
But so then another argument for Junmai is that for example, if tomorrow every sake, if they said, okay, you got to make only Junmai, you'd need a whole heck of a lot more rice to start making all the sake. And in a very struggling agricultural industry, particularly with rice farmers, that sounds very pleasant. Right? If all of a sudden all these brewers have to start buying a whole heck of a lot more rice.
There are rice fields around Japan. I mean, you go out and you visit some of these, countryside parts of Japan, and you see them. They're rice fields. They've been abandoned. No one's using them. It's just empty, And the consumption rate of eating rice in Japan is really falling really fast.
Yep.
And I don't think the agricultural industry is in a position to get itself out of this slump. And there you have these brewers, who, if they needed more rice, and of course the laws have changed, so now they can grow their own rice. Once upon a time they weren't allowed to grow their own rice. Now they are.
Well, it's not practical, really.
It isn't practical, no.
But they can do a lot of direct contracts. That's practical.
Contracted farming, right? Yeah, so that's a really, practical. The brewery I work for, they had a lot, contracted farming was the way that they'd, because a lot of brewers look at the current kind of rice supply situation in Japan are a little bit worried, because a lot of the time, when you try and buy a particular type of sake rice, it's not available, whatever, or it obviously depends on that year's harvest, if it was a good harvest or whatever. But if you grow your own rice, you're in charge of your own destiny, right? And you don't have to worry about that supply every year.
I mean, to a certain degree, you're right, but you also have to bear in mind that if you grow your own rice, if you place an order to the co-op, right, you'll get it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's really good about the co-ops is that they'll say months in advance, folks, things are not good this year.
Right, okay.
You're only getting 80% of what you ordered.
Right.
But everybody across the board is only getting 80% of what you ordered.
Yeah.
But in a good year, in a normal year and a good year, you'll get just what you ordered.
Security, in other words, right?
Yeah. If you want to grow your own, you have 2 problems.
Right.
One is you don't have enough rice. It's a bad year. It's like, now what am I going to do? Then you got to rush around. And let's say you're going to your mother, right? You got to rush out and try and buy it. You'll pay more for it. That's fine. But what if you don't get it all? Then you got to buy another rice, right? Then you blend that in. You blend it through all the tanks. Then you got to reprint all your labels because they're not 100% Yamada Nishiki anymore. So the whole point is there's a lot of risk with but go ahead. Give me 10 more seconds. Okay. The other thing is if you have too much, you got a bumper crop. What do you do with that stuff? Your plan was submitted to the government 6 months ago. So this whole thing of contract brewing, it's great. Yeah. But there are a lot of risks with it for sure.
For the smaller breweries, I think it's probably better than for the big ones because my understanding is that I heard that you can definitely edit this out, but I heard that the co-ops are not exactly fair with the way they distribute the rice.
I'm sure that's correct.
So the smaller breweries suffer sometimes, and I think it's better for the smaller breweries. Contract farming.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So there's that, and then it's also on the farmer's end. So the other, I don't want to get into a big co-op deal or whatever, but the other advantage, it's not just for the sake brewers, it's more for the farmers as well too. Is that it is a very struggling industry, and what farmers are being paid now for rice is not enough for them to make a living wage and be able to continue farming. And so by contracting, directly with a sake brewer, they're able to establish a price for what is just like climate. They may not get the same yield. They may not. There's always going to be a little bit of that risk in there for sure.
And then there's something else as well. The most contract farming deals, the brewer has to buy all the rice. They have to buy the outside standard, the inspection stuff, right? But it's possible to use that. The brewer can use that, and most breweries find a way to use that kind of uninspected rice to make shochu.
They can resell too, I think. They can
resell it. Yeah, they can sell the broker. Yeah,
they can resell the brokers if they need to.
Yeah,
but
the point
is another different world.
We should probably say that, but it's a worthwhile topic. I think maybe we should do a super rice show for another day. We'll do a super.
But the point we're trying to make is that if you have to grow more rice, it's better.
And so, the reality is, the sake industry is struggling. The farmers are struggling for the right. And so that was the argument there. The other argument then is sake made in Japan should be made from things made in Japan. And when you start adding that brewer's alcohol, 99.9% of it is imported from low cost, whatever. The origin is not from Japan. Some places are trying to remedy that. What was it? There's the new super brewers alcohol association.
Well, there's
that just kind of popped up.
Actually, they're not the only ones to do that.
No, there were some other places that have been doing it before, and there were some breweries that had been instituting that themselves and using their own rice.
For example, Okunomatsu for a while has had a product called Zenbei Ginjo.
Yeah.
Gomen. Zenmai Ginjo.
Okay.
And what they do is they take their Junmai and they distill it, and they use that as to add it back. So other breweries are doing something like that as well. But there is a group called the Nihon Kisui Jizake Seisansha Kyogikai, the Japan Pure Jizake Producers Council. And what they do is they all make a daiginjo in which the added alcohol was first brewed and then distilled from the king of sake rices, Yamada Nishiki. And that's what they use to add to their product. And it's very interesting. Hopefully it'll go well.
Yeah, I said there's no reason why you could not start making more of that brewer's alcohol from rice in Japan. That's another thing that would maybe help farmers as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, in fact, Mershin Japan, who's a subsidiary of Kirin,
right?
But they're also a big wine alcohol producer. They have begun to offer as a product to sake breweries pure alcohol distilled from rice, and in fact, mostly from Yamada Nishiki. So they've created that as a product. I'm thinking it might be for these other guys doing that group thing, but it's on the market now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
That's very, very, very cool.
It does. And so I said, if that stuff picks up and they're able to figure out how to communicate that and do that, I said that will sort of negate that argument, I guess you could say.
Exactly. If it catches on to a certain degree, then those that are against Aruten because it's not made from rice will have to try it. And those that are against Aruten because it's not made from Japanese products will be able to rejoice that now there's even more sake from there for them to enjoy.
Right.
Yep. Interesting. Another one. Just simplifying communication. I've heard that, is having all these different categories in Junmai and Ginjo and daiginjo and Junmai this, or I've heard.
But then why do you have, then you have to argue then why do you have even, like, why don't you just have daiginjo, or why don't you just have...
Or another idea is you have regular sake and then dai, chu, and shoginjo.
Right. Mm-hmm. I would actually like to introduce what we have in the wine world.
Nobody's going to follow us.
No,
Yeah.
This is actually. I had actually thought of it.
They're not going to do it.
I thought we almost put out a whole new product.
Yeah.
Comes in 4 grades.
Yeah.
Futsu, honjo, ginjo, daiginjo.
I want them. I want them to do what they do in the wine industry, and have this other tier, right? Because I do feel there's such a huge gap between, what we call now futsu-shu. Futsu-shu could actually move up into another rank, and this stuff, which is, the stuff they sell in the supermarkets, the really cheap stuff. Let's just not call it. So let's give it another name.
Yeah.
But, again, we're off on tangents. And
Yeah.
we do have last trains. But
Yeah.
if you confuse the industry, if you confuse the consumers even more,
Yeah.
they're going to pull farther away.
No, that's true. That's true. Whatever you do, it has to be to simplify.
It has to be to simplify.
Whatever you do.
I mean, maybe not anymore, but 10, 15 years ago, there were still people talking about EQ, NIKU, TOKU.
Oh, right.
It's like, has it existed for a while, sir?
Yeah.
But
So
you
people
add this.
still talk
Okay,
about it.
this is seisho and this isn't anymore.
Well, you still find bottles with tokusen written on the front, right? Or
but it's not legally
josen.
defined.
No, I know, but it's still there on
But
the
it's
label.
still confusing. Those
Still
things are
confusing to have it out
coexisting
there.
in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
We were moving towards something though. What were you talking about?
I don't know. Were we?
Thought we were.
So we keep running down the list.
We might get there again.
About eliminating factors that complicate export into and sales in overseas markets.
Well, I know in America, right? You to begin with, you only kind of imported, or you were mostly importing Junmai type sake, because in America, I think if it's got alcohol added into it, it jumps into the spirit category on taxation.
It does. However, the tax is prorated. So if it's 16% alcohol, it's not huge. But it does come down to about, for example, $1 or $2 a bottle on the import level. If you've got a $6 product and you had $2 on the price of the import, and then it goes through 25 to 40% through importer, distributor, and retailer,
Everyone has their little.
all of a sudden that $2 is
big.
huge.
It's huge.
If you've got a $60 daiginjo coming in and there's $2 more on that, forget it. Doesn't matter.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So it is not illegal. It is not illegal to import non-Junmai. Double negatives notwithstanding.
Yeah.
However, you don't see it very much in the United States.
Another characteristic for Junmai, which I think is definitely a good thing, is that you can definitely get more of the characteristics of the rice, right? If you've got more of the
I guess I would agree with that.
Yeah.
In other words, the nature of the original rice used comes through better.
More of it dissolves into the fermentation. You're dissolving the rice. Yeah.
That's a very cool point.
And especially if from now we're hoping to kind of create, maybe promote the idea of a terroir in Japan, and that the rice kind of plays more of a role in the end product, right? Because at the moment we're kind of talking the opposite of wine, maybe, and we won't put the percentages out there because we're not really sure anyway. But it's really all about the craft right now, right? But that could change in the future, and that would be really interesting because then you could have even more diversity with sake. And right now, you pick up what's supposedly a Yamada Nishikira Go Hyakumangoku, and sometimes you can tell the difference, but a lot of the time, especially when it's polished down to like 50% or whatever, there's no characteristics left in there. So it would be really interesting, actually, to champion Junmai as a way to kind of, promote the terroir or the rice.
And I think
the
that's
regionality.
Yeah, and that's starting to come out as things like there isn't, I feel like just looking around, there isn't so much of an emphasis on having to have ginjo or daiginjo or these other things. There isn't quite the emphasis on polishing rates and things like that. And so as people are trying to find ways to express that more, Junmai could be a very good tool for communicating that. And so as people start to, like we're talking about Nagano, developing local rice varieties, and how do we communicate that added value in the taste and the profile of the product more, that could be a tool for helping deliver that. So.
Definitely. Characteristics in a Junmai that I don't think, I generally find that, I know there are going to be examples that aren't typical examples, but generally I find that Junmai tends to have a higher acidity and more structure. And, I often use a white wine, red wine comparison. I really want to use that quite loosely because it only works sometimes. But where I have I used to do like a sake experience at one of the places I was working, and I had these 2 sake, and they were really, really good examples of. One was a good example of an alcohol-added sake, and one was a really good example of a Junmai sake. And that they had all these typical characteristics. And I used to basically just ask my guests, like, which type of wine do you drink? You know, and sometimes it was both red and white. But if it was one or the other, clearly, no, I only drink red. And you offered them a Junmai, nearly always got, they would go, oh yeah, this is the kind of thing I like. And then you serve them the alcohol-added one. No, I'm not so keen on this. It's got like the lighter body. It's not really. It doesn't quite have the structure that I quite like.
And I think you can do that with food as well too. That's what I find is trying to figure out what sake somebody might like is figuring out what their diet is like. What are you eating usually? What is your palate used to? I think that is a pretty good indicator, which would again I think translate over to wine as well too. What type of wine do you usually drink? Will probably provide hints as to what type of sake might you like. I mean, again, do it with beer as well too. Yeah. Somebody who lives and dies on stouts is probably going to like a different sake than somebody who lives and dies on pilsners.
Well, definitely with wine, because in the case of wine, I mean, if you're a red wine drinker, you're normally eating a particular type of food, and there are a lot of exceptions. But normally, red wine you're pairing with red meat or whatever, and then white wine you're pairing with seafood or whatever. And so if you're offering a sake which is quite light and quite with a lot more aroma and stuff, and then the food pairing thing works as well with sake as well. I mean, generally these kind of alcohol added sakes tend to be a bit lighter or whatever, and so you tend to pair them with lighter food, and the Junmai tends to be more for kind of more meaty dishes, more structured dishes, heavier dishes. A lot of exceptions. But that I think the food, asking people what type of food they like, or just basically championing Junmai, for example, because it pairs with this particular type of food. It's got more umami as well, hasn't it? Obviously, because you've got more of the rice,
and so that's going, and I think that kind of feeds into just kind of the general trend around food and dining right now as well too, which is kind of moving in Junmai's favor. Is that so? A lot of those, honjos or those really dry sakes that came through, or futsu-shu or whatever, the advantage to them was, or what was good about them with food wasn't so much this multiplier effect. It was more cancel everything out,
Clearing the palate.
Exactly. And that was a positive. Whereas what a lot of people are looking for now is when we're bringing in food, we want something that is more complex, that results in more new flavors and interesting aromas and experiences and more complexity. And as the dinner table becomes more complex with different types of food, and we're looking to serve it with different types of dishes and whatnot, as we're talking about having different types and more acidity in the Junmais and things like that, you just kind of tend to have more complexity and things that are going to play better with that more complex dinner table.
A lot of Junmai are made with traditionally a lot of Junmai are made with the kimoto process, right? So that gives them a lot of acidity. Not a lot. No. Well, not a lot, but I mean...
I would say, I would reverse it. I would say a lot of kimotos made the Junmai way. Almost all kimotos made the Junmai way.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. That's true. It's another way of looking at it. Okay.
Not all, but I would say most.
I back down from that point. I think that's definitely true.
And I guess the one other reason I think that is maybe kind of worth talking about is that switching over to Junmai is strategic. In that sort of what we're talking about now is that the larger market for the futsu-shu and for a lot of these, it's a market that is not going to sustain long term. And so having to look ahead and go, where is our market? What do people need? People do not want really simple, quote, I don't want to say simple in a bad way, but simpler styles of sakes. They don't want added alcohol. This is not what people are looking for, not just with sake, but whether it's with wine or beer or food or these other things.
I have to agree, unfortunately. That I think a lot of brewers look at the market, and I've heard brewers say this, and they say the future's in Junmai. And it's kind of a drag that brewers say that. Not all of them do, but I've heard a couple of them say it. So I think that you're correct. It's strategic. In other words, look, the futsu-shu honjozo market is contracting, right? People like Junmai. Whether or not I agree with that, if I want to sell more sake, and it's not hard for me to do this, I need to make more Junmai.
Right.
Yeah. So exactly. I do think that affecting things as well.
And so kind of looking
for better or for worse.
Yeah. So looking long term. So that kind of tends to, I think, might be one as well. So. Yeah, that's kind of. Those were the reasons that I came up with, and again, and a lot of them are. I said when you look at them, you can kind of see the validity and the reason behind it, and why some of those things, whether quote unquote true or untrue, why they would resonate with certain people. Because at the end of the day, there's personal choice, there's personal preference. Yeah. And so just to kind of have that information out there and have that context out there so that people can go, why would people choose to brew one over the other, as well as drink one over the other, or purchase one over the other.
One way of looking at it that I think is useful and practical is that you can look at it from the viewpoint is, what is your figure of merit? Yeah. If your figure of merit is, does it taste good? That's one. If your figure of merit is purity or something related to that, that'd be another figure of merit. Yeah. And so what you prefer to drink might be based on your initial figure of merit.
Yep, absolutely.
If you are interested in sake that tastes very good, really adding alcohol to it is pretty much a positive. If you're more interested in making things like traceability and purity a priority, then maybe what you choose will be different based on that.
Yeah, but just don't restrict yourself from this diversity that's out there. Just be open to, and alcohol added sake is not all the same. I've come across recently so many alcohol added sakes that don't follow the rules of alcohol added sake. So I think, and it's really opening up as well. Then the market is opening up. So just have an open mind.
I said it's another tool in the toolbox, in their tool set and their skill set. And so the market will probably change again in other directions somewhere down the road. So preserving that skill set as well too. You know, I think it's really important. And so just as people are going back and looking at other brewing styles, they might find other interesting ways in which they can integrate brewer's alcohol into different styles that maybe they hadn't done before. What is a futsu-shu kijoshu or something like that? What does that taste like? I don't know. Is anybody making one? No.
One thing that I think we should work in there somewhere along the line is that currently there's about 1,200 active brewers in Japan, and there's about 50 that are Junmai only.
Yeah.
So the rest of them, about 1,150, make some added alcohol sake as well. But there's about 50 that are pure Junmai only.
Yeah. I said, and you're starting to see some kind of more shift over there. The first one to do it was Shinkame, right? It was like 87, 86, 87, something like that, up in Saitama. Yeah. They were the first one to do it. And there is an organization, it's like the All Junmai organization. Yeah. It doesn't have an official
another extraordinarily long moniker, I'm sure.
But it also doesn't encapsulate all of the breweries that are taking part in that. Yeah.
Now, the brewery I work for is all, it's all Junmai. I mean, all Junmai, like ginjo, but they don't make any alcohol added sake. So they're in that category as well. Their argument was the same. It was kind of like using more. It was all about using more of the rice, getting more of the characteristics of the rice out. It's daiginjo. But it's interesting. Like you say, it's a tool they have, and different brewers are using it in different ways, and adopting this in different ways for different reasons.
Basically, go out and try things. Is the
which is best for the overseas market? Do you think?
I think it's going to be easier to get more Junmai into more markets. You don't have initial resistance to things like, if Junmai is pure sake, what is non-pure sake? Or what is non-Junmai number one?
It's just it really is a communication challenge.
It really is. Furthermore, there are rules and regulations and laws in some countries, some that are clear and some that are not, that would inhibit the import and growth of non-Junmai sake. Could that change? Quite possibly.
The industry is, struggling in many ways. So looking at how can we make our lives easier, in order to how can we help improve our situation,
From that point of view, probably Junmai is going to be a very powerful tool.
Yeah. So with that, that was one more episode of Sake on Air. Thank you very much, gentlemen. As always, you can find us on all the social media places at Sake on Air. We would love your questions and comments. I imagine a lot of people have questions about a lot of the things we talked about today. Questions at sakeonair.com. We would love to answer those on a future episode. How about everybody here? Would you like to share where people can find you? Website, blog, whatever, someplace where they can, if people are going,
Can I just quickly say, I gave my website out in the last episode. It's not actually up yet, so I won't do that again. I will get that website up one day. You can find me on Instagram at sake no tabibito. It's a bit long, I know.
I think these Junmai guys, they're long.
Yeah, but it means sake pilgrim, and it felt quite cool to use. Apt, yes. Thank you.
For you, John.
My website is sake-world.com. So www.sake-world.com. You can find out more than you need to know about me and sake at that site.
How about you, sir?
I'm at shochu.pro. Yes, that is actually domain. Yes,
Wild.
Nice
shochu.pro.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm on Twitter as Chris Pellegrini, Instagram as Christopher Pellegrini, because it allows more characters. I'm all the character you need, though, probably. So follow me.
Very good. Justin Potts. You can find me at potts-k.com, or you can find that on Twitter and Instagram. You can just search for my name, and I'm floating around out there somewhere. And with that, another big thanks to the Sake and Shochu Makers Association for helping me make this possible each and every time. It's been fantastic, and we will be now signing out from this lovely establishment, Sake and Shochu Information Center, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.